part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Pumpkins, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole.
Welcome to our 11th episode, where we will be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Crimson Peak. The film came out in 2015, but we thought it was the ideal movie for us to cover during the month of Halloween, especially as we're both Tom Hiddleston fans, and we've never watched this film.
So, just a bit of background information on Crimson Peak. We actually did have multiple people, including our friend Rhiannon, reach out to us whenever we said that we were doing some Halloween episodes and ask if we were covering Crimson Peak, and the answer was of course. I do think that we'll probably do this Halloween episode thing again next year. So, if you've suggested another film to us, we heard you. There will be more spooky content in a year. But Crimson Peak is a Gothic romance film, which I think fits pretty well for both me and Maggie's personal brands. It's directed, like Maggie said, by Del Toro and written by Del Toro and Matthew Robbins. It stars, and I'm probably going to murder some names, murder. So sorry in advance, but it stars Mia Wasikowska. I think that's how you say it. Tom Hiddleston, Jessica Chastain, Charlie Hunnam, and Jim Beaver. It is an interesting film that it starts in America, and then it jumps to Cumberland, England, to the house that is known as Crimson Peak.
And we didn't mean to pick two films set in New York.
Yeah, that was actually an accident. Neither of us realized that this film opens in America until we sat down to watch it.
And I was like, oh, huh.
Right? Like, who knew? But it's about a young woman who is an aspiring author. Another thing I did not realize about this film. Who marries a baronet and goes to live at this house that is known as Crimson Peak with him and his sister. It's a sort of ghost story, or as she says about her own book, it's a story with ghosts. And it received generally positive reviews when it came out. It was really praised for the design of it and for Jessica Chastain's performance, rightfully so. And I thought it was interesting. In making it, Del Toro really wanted to honor a lot of older horror films, in particular The Haunting and The Innocents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of the intro to the film. But Maggie, what did you think of Crimson Peak?
Okay, so I am a huge Del Toro fan. Shape of Water is like one of my favorite films. I was telling Nicole earlier today that I've seen it 3 times. The first time I watched it, I literally, like, the credits rolled and I hit restart. It was just fascinating. I'm also a fan of Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, and I really just appreciate his commitment to monster fun. If you know, you know. I honestly don't know why it's taking me so long to see Crimson Peak, because it is so right up my alley. I also found it to be a perfect chaser after watching The Haunting of Hill House again. I just did a rewatch and then started watching The Haunting of Bly Manor. And I felt there was a lot of, not similarities, but a lot of like contextual, like interesting intrigue that kind of matched very nicely. So I recommend that. I laughed my head off at a line towards the beginning of the film where Jim Beaver's character says, "Here in America, we bank on hard work, not privilege." And I was like, really? Do we though? Are you sure?
That is the American ideology that we love to present to people not from America.
Oh gosh. And I love seeing Jim Beaver in this, because he played Bobby Singer in Supernatural, and I was watching Crimson Peak with my mom, and both of us were just like, when he was alone in the bathroom, like, you know better than to be alone.
That I genuinely think is the most disturbing scene in the entire film, and it comes like pretty early on in the movie.
So violent. And the scene when she's looking at her father's body and she doesn't seem to know how to cope with it either. Like, he's so cold. He's so worried about his features. Like, it was such like a heartbreaking, like really captured that like innocence of Edith so early on.
Yeah.
Also loved seeing Burn Gorman. Love him. Also, like, the irony of the Enola.
Yes.
I was like, Burn Gorman and Enola in one film.
It's a cinematic universe.
It is all one universe. They're actually the extended family members of Sherlock Holmes. The Sharps are the Holmes cousins. Also, I need my favorite men to stop having weirdly incestuous relationships with their crazy sisters and then dying entirely unfair deaths. I am now currently pouring one out for Jaime Lannister. Honestly, I wish I could spend like an hour talking about like the deep connection to like family trauma and the inheritance of it, because there was so much like psychological aspects to this film that really warrant like an entire essay written on them. And I'm sure Tumblr did that 5 years ago.
I'm positive.
What did you think, though? I mean, you're not a horror person.
No, I'm not a horror person. I'm not a Del Toro person. There are many reasons why it took me 5 years to watch this. I actually have been meaning to watch this for years because Tom Hiddleston and like Gothic romance is pretty much a guaranteed combination for me to like something. And I've actually had this DVD for years and just had never like cracked it open.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I was excited for the excuse to finally like make myself do it, and I've been trying to like watch some, Halloween-y movies, and this definitely was not, I was not scared by this at all. Like, for anyone listening who like hasn't seen it yet, it's not that scary. Like, there's a couple of disturbing scenes, but they're not disturbing because they're like horror-y. It's like the one very violent scene that we've already referenced.
Yeah.
And Maggie, the other scene that freaked me out, and for people who've seen it, whenever there's the big confrontation between Lucille and Thomas.
Yes.
And she it's what she hits him with and what it does.
Yep.
Yeah, that freaked me out.
I was like,
that
body horror.
Yeah, I did not like that. But I genuinely didn't find like the ghost aspect of this to be that freaky.
I would actually say Pan's Labyrinth is scarier than this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that both this and Sleepy Hollow are like pretty tame.
Yeah.
So thank you to whoever decided that period, horror films like this. Maybe next year we step it up and we take on like The Witch or something.
Yes.
But this film, it has the aesthetic. It has the vibes. I think that, even people who don't like this movie, because I was looking through like Letterboxd and stuff, cannot deny that the design in this is gorgeous. The costume design, hair design, production design are all exquisite. Like the sleeves on these dresses, I'm obsessed. Tom Hiddleston's hair in this movie,
oh my God,
I am obsessed.
There's that one scene.
True. There. I literally said "oh" out loud when his like curls fall across his forehead. This movie, actually, I looked it up. Its budget was only like $55 million. And I know that to say like only 55 million sounds kind of crazy, but I genuinely would have expected it to be more, just because of how much production there is in it, and obviously a lot of CGI work as well. So I thought that was pretty impressive. It has some really nice lines in the screenplay. Like, I love basically the openings, like not the opening scene, but the first scene after we time jump from the, early part in the beginning, when Edith says, "I would prefer to be Mary Shelley. She died a widow." I was like, oh, okay.
The foreshadowing.
This character is not what I thought she was going to be. And I do think that the characters in this film are really fascinating, and they really do a good job of crafting these characters. I would love to waltz with Tom Hiddleston. That was one of my favorite scenes.
Who wouldn't?
Please. I also I love creepy Victorian Jessica Chastain. Like, I would love to see Jessica Chastain do some more period film that is sort of mid 20th century, because I feel like she's done several set in sort of that time. But I love her in this like period garb in this, and I think she fits into it very well. I thought this was interesting, Maggie. I don't know if you saw this, but originally, whenever they started working on this movie, This was not the cast that they had. They had cast Emma Stone and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Hate it so much.
What a different movie that would have been.
Also, I laughed when I saw Emma Stone after our conversation last night about the similarities between a certain scene and The Favorite.
Yes. But, like, I'm so sorry. I like Emma Stone fine. I don't have anything, like, against her. This is not, like, a Matt Damon thing, but...
No, she doesn't fit period films.
She doesn't fit
I love her to
period
bits.
films. I also don't think she fits this character at all, because I think the actress for this character needed to have that sort of look of innocence and
Yes.
like that almost childlike thing about her that Mia definitely does.
Was it you who said that Emma Stone looks like an actress she looks like a character who knows what a computer is?
I know whenever I look at her that she has used a microwave.
Okay, that's it.
Like,
yes.
Yeah, I know whenever I look at her that she knows what Wi-Fi is. Like, she just looks very modern. I also think, like, Benedict Cumberbatch is a good actor. He is, but I think that most of Benedict Cumberbatch's characters come off as a certain type of, like, intellectual asshole.
Yes.
Which is great and fits most of his characters very well. I don't think it would have fit well at all here.
Okay, can we talk about the idea of the fact that Emma Stone and Benedict Cumberbatch most likely did a chemistry test for this film, since it was, like,
right?
very
like,
close to filming?
Doesn't make sense to me.
And I'm like, did they have chemistry? Because I can't picture that at all. I could picture Emma Stone and Tom Hiddleston.
Or I could picture Benedict and Mia there.
But I can't picture that combo.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm so glad that we ended up with the cast that we did, because I do think that they are all really perfect in their roles.
I love Mia.
I think Mia's so good in this. I think Tom Hiddleston is so good in this. I mean, I've seen him, like, in roles where he is better just because he has a bit more to contend with, but I really love Jessica Chastain in this. Like, make my supporting ballot for this year. Love her in this.
She played crazy well.
She really did. And she played it without slipping into any of the sort of, like, cliches too much, I think, which I appreciated. I will also say, this film has too many bugs in it. Too many bugs. I am very afraid of butterflies.
Seriously.
I don't like anything that flies. Like bats, butterflies, birds, it's all out for me.
Interesting.
They can come at me from multiple angles, and I don't like that. It's been a thing ever since I was... I also, while I was in Brighton, like, did have a seagull, like, literally take a scone from me one time. And I've never quite recovered from it. So I don't like anything that can fly. So that really freaked me out. That was maybe the most freaky thing about this film to me. And I will say, I'm not super crazy about the way that the ghosts are done in this movie.
They're very odd.
It's very odd. It's very much like, I don't know, it just doesn't jive with my idea of ghosts. Which is, again, like a personal thing. I'm sure it works for some other people. There were a couple of scenes where I think I was meant to be scared and I laughed a little bit. I'm so sorry, Del Toro. But otherwise, I think this is like a really good film. Like on Letterboxd, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I love the parallels that it has to like Jane Eyre, which, you know, is a throwback for us, I guess, to one of our early episodes.
Yes.
And also to Rebecca, which obviously is on my mind because of the new film that just came out. But yeah, I really dig this film. It's probably my favorite like horror film.
Oh, very good.
Even if it's sort of light horror, but I'm still willing to say it's my favorite horror movie.
And nothing happens to the dog, in case anyone is worried.
Oh my god. Thank God. Because I texted Maggie part of the way through it because she had watched it before I did. And I was like, please tell me right now that nothing happens to this dog because I need a warning. If something's gonna happen to a dog, like, I can deal with it, but I need to know in advance.
The dog is safe.
Here's looking at you, the devil all the time. But, so we wanted to talk about a couple of different topics. Obviously, Maggie will talk about costuming. But I thought that we would start by talking about sort of Victorians and their beliefs on the supernatural. This is actually something that has been on my mind even before I watched this because I read a very interesting Twitter thread from @WikiVictorian the other day that was talking about Victorians and spiritualism. But so ghost stories were very popular in the Victorian era, partially because of the rise of the periodical press, people, instead of just telling them orally, started to read them in these periodical publications. And obviously, ghost stories tend to have a lot of suspense, so they're a very good format to keep people sort of coming back week after week to find out what happens. Even something like The Woman in White, Wilkie Collins' novel, is sort of a ghost story, even if it doesn't like fully, pan out to be ghosts in the end, but it was a very popular thing in literature at the time. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which was published in 1843, periodically, of course, is essentially also a ghost story. Part of this also comes around because religion at this time is sort of full of dissenting views. There's a lot of different ideas about religion that are kind of fighting for popularity at the time. And you also, of course, have Darwin and other scientists starting to challenge religious belief. And I think that all of that sort of creates this atmosphere where something like this belief in ghosts and otherworldly things can very easily slip in. It might seem like this is sort of at odds with the rise of science and the rise of industrialism, but they actually go hand in hand and they're definitely linked. Mm-hmm. Part of that is that gaslight becomes popular in this era, and gaslight did cause hallucinations. Obviously, they didn't know that. They interpreted it as ghosts. There's also the fact that, like, it's at this period that we start to see this thing that now I think we do associate with, like, ghosts and seances and stuff, which is tapping. The ghost would, like, tap out a message to you. And that rises around the same time as the telegraph machine, which also is very dependent on tapping. There's also the rise of photography, especially if you know anything about photography at its early invention. If you moved, if someone walked through, you would get what looked like an apparition of some sort in your photo. And so, like, ghostly photography became a big thing. If you want to look more into this, there's a really interesting Guardian article from a few years ago about it, but I thought that it was very interesting to see, like, how actually all of the science and invention that's going on in the era contributes to this rise in belief in ghosts. There's also mesmerism, which was a very popular medical treatment at the time, which is you essentially put the patient into a trance and then make their energy flow into, like, the afflicted part of the body, and that heals them.
It's still very popular today.
Yeah, it came into popularity at this time, and there's a lot of people who really believed in it, including, like, Charles Dickens, that you might not expect today. But so at this time, there's the rise of spiritualism, which is a set of combined beliefs, basically that 1, ghosts exist, 2, ghosts can communicate with living people, and then 3, ghosts continue to evolve in the spirit world, and because of that, they can tell living people something useful about morality, religion, ethics, something in that way. Basically that they are continuing to evolve and they aren't just static to the spirit that they were at their death. What's interesting is Dickens was actually very anti-spiritualism, even though obviously, like, A Christmas Carol has these ghost characters in it, but other authors, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was a strong convert to this belief system. There's also spiritism, which is, like, part of spiritualism, but it's one of those things where, like, all spiritists are spiritualists, but not all spiritualists are spiritists. And that's basically the added belief in reincarnation, which was started, or spiritism was started in the 19th century by this French educator named Hippolyte Léon Denisard-Ribal. And spiritualism was definitely at its peak in the sort of 1840s to 1920s. And part of how the movement got its start was the Fox sisters were from Hydesville, New York. So New York is coming back into play. And they were some of the leaders of this movement after they supposedly started communicating with a ghost of a man who was murdered in their house in 1848. There were 3 sisters. It originally was just the 2, and the third one got in on it later, and they would hold seances. They became very famous. They did later admit that they had made it all up, but it was kind of too late at that point, and too many people already believed in it.
Or did they say that because people were
Right.
ridiculing them and they didn't want to be burned as witches? I'm just saying.
I mean, they were actually very popular. They were essentially celebrities. Seances became very popular at this time, and even members of the British royal family participated in them. And mediums became pretty high in demand, and they were typically women, which I thought was interesting. Male mediums were often distrusted and seen as kind of shady, but women were believed to have an easier time communicating with spirits inherently. And so that's why, and I feel like even today in media and stuff, whenever you see someone holding a seance, it's typically a woman. And that is because the Victorians genuinely believed that women could communicate better with spirits. So I think
Unless you're Mr. Rochester.
Well, yeah, there's that. But I think that what we see in Crimson Peak in terms of their willingness to believe in ghosts is pretty accurate to the era. Like, obviously, the way that Del Toro decided to depict these ghosts doesn't exactly fit what you would have seen in illustrations at this time, but you know, it's not that far off. So I think that this is actually one of the more accurate aspects of the film, which, and I'm not saying, like, the film is actually a decently historically accurate movie, I think, but I think that the way that they portray that, even though they obviously don't delve deep into it, but I do think even the fact that her novel even includes ghosts in it is very true to the period.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I was really fascinated with how Del Toro brought in so much of that spiritualism into this film. So I get the pleasure of talking about Victorians and mourning.
We are really bringing out all the good topics for Halloween.
Seriously, the best topics. I am only a little bit obsessed with the Victorian mourning culture. I only have like an entire bookcase filled with books. No biggie. Which means I could talk for an hour about this topic. So I've decided to hone in a little bit on what this film did and did not get quite right. There's 2 really great moments in this film that showcase Victorian mourning culture. The first being, of course, Edith's father's funeral, and then also Lucille's collection of hair from Thomas's past wives. It should be noted that the choice of 1901 for this film as a starting point is interesting because that's the year that Queen Victoria died, which ended her lifelong mourning of Prince Albert. So I thought that was a very interesting choice. We start out in America at the beginning of the film, and American mourning culture wasn't quite the same as Victorians in England. Edith doesn't quite observe mourning the way that she should. It's quite clear that the loss of her father like deeply affected her, but she didn't go into the regimented year of mourning, in which she would have worn black for like the first 9 months and then gradually started kind of removing different pieces until she was back into her regular day wear. She also would not have gotten married quite so quickly out of respect for her father's death. So that was something that they didn't get quite right. But
I guess you could argue that because she's an orphan with no other family that, you know.
Well, then, as an orphan, she would have been relied upon to mourn even more so just by, like, the societal culture. So it helps that she did leave that place and go to England where no one knows what her backstory is.
And I also do think that it's kind of implied that the fact that she has hastily gone into this marriage and whatever is a little bit shady.
Sketchy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
so
they're
I think,
still investigating her father's murder.
Yeah.
And she's like, hey, can I get my inheritance?
And she's like, gotta yeet myself out of here. Bye.
Got myself a hot husband. I'm peacing out on the next ship out. I mean, I respect the grind. I'm so sorry.
I literally was holding in a comment about it, so.
Anyways, Lucille's hair collection is likely less to do with the observation of Victorian mourning practices and more to do with taking a trophy from her victims. But it's nice that there is that kind of dichotomy between the 2 practices. But Victorian mourners do preserve, or did, I speak as if is present day. They did preserve locks of hair, and they also created intrinsic art, and they would wear trinkets crafted from their loved one's hair. And if you go to museums and if you go to antique stores, you can find plenty of these for sale or on display. A few years ago, it's probably 10 years ago now, a museum that I was affiliated with, somebody brought their mourning collection of artifacts that they had collected over the years, and it literally filled an entire room. And it was some of the most breathtakingly gorgeous pieces you will ever see. Just how like fine and minute the details were for some of the way that they had braided the hair together into like these full scenes and like made paintings essentially out of hair. Fascinating. And it was kind of all part of this mourning practice. So those were like really the two clear attempts at paying homage to the Victorian mourning culture. And of course it is kind of shifting now that, Victoria has died, and it starts out in America. So I didn't expect there to be a lot of that in the film. But it is interesting to note those two moments. I also wanted to point out the element of poisoning in the film. Also something else that I have a weird amount of knowledge on. Nicole and I were discussing it last night when she was watching the film, and I realized maybe not everybody picked up on what the poison was that Lucille was using on Edith. It's the fireberries, which I think are mentioned by name twice in the film.
Yes, and you can safely eat them.
Yeah, no. So firethorn berries are no different than plums, apricots, cherries, peaches, even apples. They all contain seeds or pits that contain trace amounts of cyanide. And even almonds have cyanide in them. It has to do with gases that are produced in your stomach when it digests, which is why you shouldn't eat these pits or these seeds. So what most likely would have happened would have been that Lucille was grinding up the seeds along with the tea. Cyanide tastes like almonds, like very acrid, very bitter almonds. So that, that cherry taste. Almonds taste very much like cherries. Mm-hmm. So the tea itself, the berry taste probably overpowered that acidic tang. So you wouldn't notice it. You wouldn't have noticed it when she was putting it in the porridge either. And it's not going to kill you instantly. It's kind of a slow, prolonged death, which I think was kind of a nice callback to her conversation about the butterflies and the ants eating the butterflies. Cyanide will cause extreme gastrointestinal distress like vomiting, which will eventually lead to your death. So that's most likely what happened to the other wives as well, or at least some of them. It also causes headaches, confusion, drowsiness, vomiting, all of the symptoms that Edith had. So even though it's not explicitly stated that it was cyanide, it's like pretty obvious that that's what was doing.
And cyanide was like a pretty common Victorian poison, not as much as arsenic, right? But yes, it tracks. It makes sense.
It does a trick. Apparently, it's only like you only need like 200 almonds or something. I don't know. There was like a weird amount of, 200 apple seeds will kill a grown man.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you'd have to like purposely.
Please do not try this at home.
Seeds. Yeah, you wouldn't like there's no way you could accidentally eat that many apple seeds. Like,
exactly. And it's really hard to trace too, especially like at that time. So super easy to get. And something I thought of as well is with her coughing up blood, it really kind of appears to also seem like maybe consumption.
I was just thinking she, afterwards they would have just been like, consumption.
I guess she got consumption. How sad.
Yeah.
Look at these stained pillowcases. So I thought that was a really interesting, very minor plot point.
Yeah. So I also wanted to talk about another topic that I thought was very interesting, and another thing that I think the film does very well. I've called this section in my notes, British Land, American Money, a Love Story. Because in the film, we see Thomas marry Edith for her money, because he has this title, he has this land and this, massive, beautiful house, but he has no money. And that's actually a very common thing that happened at this time. It was very common for British gentlemen to marry American heiresses during this, what we have called in America during the Gilded Age. the rise of industrialization hit a lot of British noble families really hard, and a lot of them no longer had the money to upkeep their massive houses because that was more expensive than the money that the estate was actually producing. And so this trend kind of begins in the 1870s, although obviously, like, it had been occurring in smaller numbers for many years before. This is something that might be familiar to listeners from Downton Abbey. This is what is described as having happened between Robert Crawley and Cora, which is, why she's American. The most famous example of this is probably Consuelo Vanderbilt's marriage to Charles Spencer Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, which was a terribly unhappy marriage, but a lot of money that changed hands. And the Consuelo's mother was kind of obsessed with the idea of getting her child married off to British aristocracy and getting her a title. This typically was a way that American, like, new money families could gain social standing that eluded them because they were new money, by gaining a title and a manor and, a fancy British man in your family. And so these marriages typically were arranged by parents, like a business transaction. Parents would take their American daughter to London for the season, and it'd be sort of like a marriage mart, and they'd see who they got the best offers from, who had the highest title, who had the best connections, and then they would essentially exchange money for that title being conferred upon their daughter, which is, it's interesting. It's interesting. In 1895 alone, 9 American women married into the peerage. And whenever you consider how small the peerage really was and, like, how many men at a time might be eligible for marriage, that's actually a wildly large number. And obviously what we see in the film is not that exactly. Like, it's not one of these marriages that's arranged by parents and really strategic on both sides. What we see in the film is a lot more innocent on Edith's side. And she certainly perceives it to be more of a love match. I did find in 1874 an American woman named Jenny Jerome, who came from a very wealthy family, married Lord Randolph Churchill against the wishes of their parents. They had actually only known each other for 3 days when he proposed, but they had had the favor of the Prince of Wales, because he knew Ginny and he really liked her. And so because of that, they were kind of able to get away with it, even though their parents didn't really approve. And they were stuck in negotiations for months trying to figure out the contract side of it. But that is partially noteworthy because 7 months into their marriage, into their relationship, their son was born. And we all know him because his name is Winston Churchill. So I think that's an example of one that was not as strategic, that was more genuinely a love match as they would have perceived it to be. A lot of these marriages didn't go very well. Many of the women were displeased with what they found in their new homes, being used to the best that American money could buy. They weren't thrilled with these drafty English manors that often didn't have running water and often were in a state of neglect, which was literally why, these British men had married them. And I do think we see some of that in the film, in that, the manor is in neglect. Crimson Peak is sinking into the ground. It does have running water, which I was like, I don't know that it would have actually had that, even in 1901, being as sort of out of the way as it is. But maybe. Obviously, it doesn't seem to be working very well. So that tracks. And a lot of these marriages actually ended in separation or divorce. A lot of these women stayed in England afterwards and remarried there. And one thing that I thought was interesting was I read several articles about this, and they all noted that these British men really liked these American women, even though they did obviously face some issues in fitting in, but they liked that they were intelligent, beautiful, and often bolder than English women had been raised to be, especially if you think that these are not even American old money women typically, but American new money. And a lot of these women helped their husbands advance in politics, partially because, they were maybe a bit headstrong and sort of more attuned to that. A lot of them were seen as being more worldly, because maybe they traveled more or were more well-read. But I thought that all of this was interesting. Obviously, our heroine Edith is quite well-read, but perhaps not so well-traveled. But you do see that all the moms in the town are a bit aflutter at this English baronet coming to visit, and they all want to, push their daughter in front of him. But he is, intrigued by Edith and intrigued by her being the sole heir to her father's money. And this trend sort of died down by like 1910. So what we see in the movie would have been like kind of the tail end of that. And it's because as New York society shifted sort of towards these new money families, with people like J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie and their families, these women no longer felt the need to marry somewhere else, because as the nouveau riche became what was popular in New York City, they didn't need to leave to make a good match. And so this kind of died out. And also presumably, like, there's only so many eligible bachelors with an estate that needs saved in England to continue the trend. But I thought that this was really interesting because I do think that, like, that's one of the truer aspects of what we see in the film, is that as dastardly as the plan is, once you put all of their details into it, let's say, it actually wasn't uncommon for a British man like Thomas to seek out an American wife whose money could help save his estate or his business or whatever. And it also wasn't uncommon that he might go straight back to his lover as soon as they're married, which I think what's more uncommon in the film is that, who his lover is, but
just a little bit.
just a little bit. But that whole idea is actually pretty historically accurate.
So with all of that being said, what you're telling me is there's still a chance for a rich British man to show up next week looking for an American wife?
He probably won't be rich. He might be titled.
Land rich, money poor.
Yeah, land rich. So if you've got money,
take the house.
It could work,
I mean, it might be a little, we've always lived in the castle, but it'll be fine.
There are worse things.
Yeah.
There are worse things. I'm just saying Meghan Markle went into a long tradition of Americans marrying British men.
Hey, respect the grind.
I always do. I always do.
And now to segue into costuming, which is another topic I could probably spend an hour talking about. Kate Hawley designed some insanely gorgeous, lush costumes for this film, and it is a damn shame that they did not win any awards. I do not understand how that is possible. These costumes were phenomenal. There were so many leg of mutton sleeves. It just filled my heart with glee. That is like the height of fashion in New York in the late 1800s and the 1900s. Beautiful to see them on screen. Because at that point we were slowly shifting from the Victorian era into the Edwardian era in terms of fashion. But obviously fashion doesn't just like roll over as soon as you get a new decade. So there was still a lot of kind of give and take between the two styles, which was seen in both the ball scene, at the funeral, and in some of the town scenes with the other women's clothes on display. For a Gothic horror film, all of the costumes are historically accurate. And the trims on everything, chef kiss. It is magnificent. Like a visual feast for the eyes, like just magnificent. I was watching it with my mom, like I said before, and she was just over the moon with the trims and the details. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of the funeral, because that dress is like highly embroidered and like hand details, and you only see it from like the chest up when she's like leaning against Thomas. Like, that whole dress is insane. I was looking at pictures of it when it was on display in a museum, and what they did with that dress, it is a shame that we did not get more scenes of it. I thought that this film was done very well in terms of playing to the characters' either traits or identity or the allegories wrapped up in their characteristics. When we're first introduced to Lucille, she's in this gorgeous crimson ball gown, and it's in such stark contrast with Edith's cape and gown during the ball scene. And that dress really evokes those images of like the virginal princess, especially with the neckline of that cape. And that's before we really know this kind of contrast between her and Lucille. So very interesting foreshadowing there. I also read a really great interview from the costume designer Kate talking about Jessica. And I don't know if you noticed this with the red dress, but it's got that really fantastic bodice back, the lacing up the spine. And so she was talking about how even though Jessica is very petite, she's also very curvy. She was talking about how she's a very curvy, petite woman. And she wanted to evoke more images of something that was like starving. And so she went with a shape that kind of looked like a spine sticking up when she's playing the piano, because she wanted to play into this idea that her character is, in a sense, decaying like a butterfly. And so that kind of gaunt look, which I thought the detailing, just like those images that they set into the costumes to kind of evoke those reactions from the audience, is just fantastic. And Lucille's clothes are intentionally more 1880s, since they are broke and would not have been, sticking up with the times. Even Thomas's clothes are a little outdated, and there's even a line about it. So I thought that was great that they made a point of making sure that was actually accurate, because sometimes you'll watch historical films and they'll talk about somebody's clothes being outdated or something, but they match everybody else's, so it doesn't work. So it was really great to see that done. I also loved this. I found this out earlier today, and it just made me so happy, because when I was watching the film, I thought Edith's look reminded me of a Rossetti painting with the hair. And I was like, why would that be? Like, I love Rossetti. You're just thinking of Rossetti. And then I was reading an interview from Del Toro, and the look was designed off of Rossetti's Helen of Troy painting. The yellow color, the long hair, it was supposed to look like Annie Miller, the model in that portrait. So super excited that I saw that and recognized it as an art fan of Rossetti's art. And I also thought it was really great because Mia looks so right with the weird wavy blonde hair. I don't know if you've seen Alice in Wonderland, but she has a very similar style in Alice. And it suits her and her, I don't want to say a waif-like innocence, but she has this very beguiling innocence about her. And that flowing blonde hair just looks so right. And they really worked so hard to kind of create this dichotomy between her and Lucille. And I really think it comes into play with the scenes of their dresses that have moth-like and butterfly aspects to them. I read another interview with Kate where she was talking about how Edith is a moth to the flame, but Lucille is the butterfly.
Okay.
And so they tried to play with that. The dress that Lucille is wearing when she is discovered with Thomas, and she flies down the stairs after Edith, it's meant to look like a butterfly. It's the blue and the white, and you notice how her sleeves puffed out with the movement. It's meant to look like a butterfly, whereas Edith's kind of got her nightgown on, and it's kind of up around her neck, and it's very modest and more like a moth. So there's a lot of this playing with butterfly moth imagery, and I think there's even a scene where there's a moth flying towards the flame, and it's all kind of wrapped up into what they've done. And I think I've talked about this a dozen times on this series, is talking about how much I like when they put so much thought into the costumes that you can see the parallels between what's happening where it's not just like, oh yeah, the costumer's making some pretty costumes and then I'm going to focus on the story, but where you have a director and a writer and a costumer that work together to create the picture. That's how you make a perfect film. You can
Definitely.
have weak dialogue, but as long as it's visually attractive and it ties together, you can have a magnificent film. And we're fortunate that this film had perfection of everything. And then, a character we didn't even talk about, I think, at all, is Alan.
Oh, God bless Alan. I will say real quick, I'm sorry to like derail your costuming talk.
Please do.
I think that, they set up sort of this little love triangle in this movie, and I think it's so well done. I love a good love triangle when it's done well.
Yes.
And I think that this is a really nicely done one, especially in that I think that you kind of need that foil of Alan to Thomas to get that idea very early on that maybe Thomas, like, maybe he's not as good as he seems. Like,
yes.
Maybe this man is too good to be true, and he actually is a little sketchy. And I think that having Alan there as this, like, almost puppy dog of a man, which I feel like is not typically what Charlie Hunnam plays.
No.
So it's very interesting to see him in this role. I actually, like, did not recognize him for a minute. I was like, who is that?
And then I was like, wait, Del Toro did Pacific Rim, and he's in Pacific Rim, so that's where the connection is. Okay, because I like connecting where they pick up actors and use them in other projects.
And this is very unlike, he honestly, like, does not look like I've ever seen him look in any other film.
No, I need him to do more films like this, to be perfectly honest.
I think he fits the period aesthetic really nicely, actually. But I do think that, like, the way that they even costume the two of them differently does a lot to make them stand out from each other.
Yes, Alan's in such, like, warm browns and, like, very earthy tones, whereas Thomas is in more, like, dark blues and dark greens and blacks and much more. And a lot of Thomas's costumes match with Lucille's, which I guess is meant to make you wonder about their relationship. Like, are they just close siblings or are they close siblings? And, I also, kind of going back to, like, thoughts on the film, is I really liked the images that were, evoked with Alan as well. He had a very much, like, a feel of, like, the scientist that comes to save the day and, like, Frankenstein. And then you also kind of had the images of Frankenstein at the end of the film when you had the townspeople coming with torches towards the house. And there was a lot of imagery and homages paid to classic Gothic tales, and especially with, like, Mary Shelley being referenced, it's all there, which I thought was fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. Do you have any other final thoughts on the film itself before? I know we've got some reviews and comments to talk about, and I also thought we might want to do a little preview of what we have coming up. We've got some interesting themes for the next couple of months.
Yes. I'm trying to think of any other comments. I probably will watch this again because I have Cinemax for another 6 days. But I thought it was a good chaser to watching, like, The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. It's got a lot of really good imagery, a lot of good storytelling, and it's different. And I like stories that are different.
I definitely think this is going to become, like, one of my yearly October Halloween watches. I do like, it is different. It's very creative, certainly, but at the same time, it builds on, like, a long tradition of, like, Gothic romance that we, frankly, in my opinion, don't see enough of these days, especially, like, original stories that kind of fall into those tropes. And so I really appreciate it for that. I do think it'd be a really interesting film to pair with, like, the 1940 Hitchcock Rebecca or a Jane Eyre adaptation, because Thomas essentially has, his own sort of wife in the attic, past wives haunting that you see in some of those most famous, like, Gothic romance works. So I really was blown away by how much I like this movie.
Me too. I think I hope it becomes a cult classic because I still feel like not enough people have seen it.
I'm not gonna lie, I would be interested to see a musical based on this movie.
Me too. I was thinking that the entire time.
I would want it composed by like Dave Malloy or someone like that who could like
Ooh,
really do it justice. Like I would love to see what someone like that who's like really a visionary would do with it.
I love it.
Yeah,
Now I'm going to think about that.
same. Okay, so I wanted to shout out. We hit 200 followers on Twitter, which is super exciting.
Not too shabby for 6 months.
Not at all. I think that we'll probably try and do something special whenever we hit like 300.
Mhm.
Whether that's some sort of like sticker giveaway or something. So definitely if you're not following us on Twitter already, make sure that you do that.
Yes. It's so great that we've had so many people engaging with us on Twitter. It's been so fun.
Absolutely. And I know like we've put out this will be our third episode of October, which we don't typically do, but we kind of got thrown off between September and October. So thank you for, hanging out with us more than usual this month.
Yes. And shout out to our incredible editor, Albert, who has had to edit those 3 episodes in 1 month for us. He is fantastic.
Thank you, Albert.
And then we also had a shout out over on Twitter from Molly McVie. Thanks for following back. Really enjoying your Sleepy Hollow episode so far.
I also just want to say a big thank you to Historian or Claire, who is one of our biggest and like most consistent supporters. We love your content. I seriously look forward to, seeing your Instagram posts and your blog posts and everything. Everyone should definitely check out her blog. It's at Historian, so HISDORYAN.co.uk.
And then thank you to Thank You 5 Pod for the recommendations on some other horror films to watch. I'm sure Nicole is going to dive into those before Halloween.
And we definitely are going to also keep those on tabs for, next year's set of spooky episodes.
Oh, yes.
Thank you to Ryan Bullock. I hope that's how that's pronounced. For including us on your FF list every Friday. We really appreciate it. It's really great to see that sort of consistent support.
And of course, thank you to the History Girls over on Instagram who always share our episodes. You should check out their podcast as well. And their Instagram is like a quality follow.
And I also just wanted to give a little bit of a preview for anyone who has made it to the end of this episode. We're not going to share like what films we're going to be talking about specifically, but I did want to share that we have some very exciting things planned for both November and December that you'll definitely want to stick around for. Maggie, do you want to tell what we are doing in November?
We are going to be having 2 guests. We're going to be doing 2 episodes and having 2 guests talking about some films that I hope everyone will be really excited to hear about. Thanksgiving is in November if you're an American, so it's really great to share the love and to bring some friends on to have our very own kind of Friendsgiving in the month of November.
I'm so excited for Friendsgiving. And then in December, we thought, of course, we're going to be doing some holiday films. We've got 2 very exciting films picked out, including our first period drama that we're going to be looking at that was made pre 1950, which is very exciting to me.
So in and of itself, it's a historical film.
Exactly. And I am fascinated by older pieces that, are set in an even earlier time period. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then we've also got, I think both of those episodes are going to be really special treats. And really good things to get everyone like in the holiday mood. It's been a very weird year. I know I, for one, am very much looking forward to the holiday season, even though it's going to look, I think, quite different from normal.
So strange.
We're both very lucky in that we do get to be with our families. And I'm definitely going to be doing a lot to make sure that this is a fun, exciting holiday season this December, even though it's going to be different than usual. And, we want to be able to contribute to that with our special podcast episodes.
Yes. And with that, we have come to our conclusion, I think.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening to our 11th episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies.
We'd love to hear from you on social media and to hear what you think of Crimson Peak. We'd also love for you to send us any films that you would like to see us review in the future.
You can find us on social media. We are at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you want to follow our personal accounts, you can find Maggie at Maggie of the Town, and you can find me at Nicole Ackman 16. I'm also on Letterboxd, if anybody wants to see my reviews of every film that I watch over there.
She watches so many.
I do.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or on the Airglue Media website. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or over on Podchaser. Every other episode, we're going to try to read our podcast reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured.
We will be back soon with another exciting episode as we start Friendsgiving here on History Girls at the Movies, and as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. Until then, stay safe and healthy. Don't forget to vote if you are in America, and have a spooky Halloween.
Mwahaha. You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
"200 apple seeds will kill a grown man."
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Murder.
Mwahaha.